Hello.
Greetings. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, we've just gone past the table of demons remark, and he passes straight to legalism next. Legalism and libertinism, the opposite responses to Gnostic ideas, as we've laid out before. And he says a couple of things that completely overturn two of the principles you learn if you're a faithful Jehovah's Witness. You learn them very early. You learn them in the first book you study with the witnesses. And those principles are, God has certain restrictions in regard to food. Well, not just food, but blood restrictions. And this doctrine, of course, sets you apart from everybody else. But the other thing is the idea that bad associations spoil useful habits, meaning the spin you put on that, and it's from Corinthians, interestingly. Here's where we are right now.
Yeah.
From Corinthians, you therefore construe that Christians are not supposed to hang out with or associate with anyone who's not a Jehovah's Witness.
Yeah.
Well, let's see what Paul says here about that construal or construction you place upon his words later in the book.
I like construal. Is that a new word?
It's a good word. Whether it's a new one or not, I don't care. It's a good word.
Okay, I like it. Okay.
This is New World Translation again, right?
Verse 23. All things are lawful, but not all things are advantageous. All things are lawful, but not all things build up. Let each one of us keep seeking, not his own advantage, but that of the other person. Eat whatever is sold in a meat market, making no inquiry because of your conscience. For to Jehovah belong the earth and everything in it. If an unbeliever invites you and you want to go, eat whatever is set before you, making no inquiry on account of your conscience. But if anyone says to you, "This is something offered in sacrifice," do not eat because of the one who told you, and because of conscience. I do not mean your own conscience, but that of the other person. For why should my freedom be judged by another person's conscience? If I am partaking with thanks, why am I to be spoken of abusively over that for which I give thanks? Therefore, whether you are eating or drinking or doing anything else, do all things for God's glory. Keep from becoming causes for stumbling, to Jews as well as Greeks, and to the congregation of God. Just as I am trying to please all people in all things, not seeking my own advantage, but that of the many, so that they may be saved. Become imitators of me, just as I am of Christ.
Well, three little things here. One is the last line that's in chapter 11, right? So
Verse
we
1.
have verse 1 of chapter 11, which should be in chapter 10, because it's the culmination of the prior argument.
Yeah.
The other thing is about the intrusion of the name Jehovah here. It is true that it is from, in the Hebrew text, it is the earth belongs to Yahweh and the fullness thereof, Psalm 24. But this just proves that Paul and the other Christians of the era generally quoted from the Greek, where it says Lord, not Jehovah or Yahweh. And the other thing is verse 32. Give no offense to Jews or to Greeks or to the church of God. Paul breaks the human race down into three. Jews, Greeks, and the church. I think that's a better way to think about all of history and prophecy than any other way that Paul ever gives us in single verse there, how he sees things.
And because he's talking about stumbling, not stumbling any of these groups, because they do all have different sensitivities.
That's right. That's right. So that brings us to the meat of this passage, and it is about food.
Yeah.
But what judgment do you reach about food here if you're without Jehovah's Witness glasses?
Well, I think the very first line that I read, the first verse 23, all things are lawful to the Christian. Well, could we say that as a Jehovah's Witness? All things are lawful? We could never say that.
There is a problem with that,
because
though.
we had rules that you had to keep.
This is true, but remember we made the point back in chapter 6 and chapter 7 that sometimes he's quoting the other guys. So when he says all things are lawful, apparently some in Corinth are throwing that phrase around as if it means now we can do anything we want.
Oh, yeah.
So whether it's Paul, some Bibles, like the King James, favor that by not putting quotes around it. But Paul is saying that. Whether it's Paul or they that are saying it, the point is still the same. He's affirming it.
Yeah.
He seems to be affirming it here, but he says in answer to that, but not all things build up. They're not all good.
That's right. So it doesn't mean that you can just do whatever you like and not think about it. His concern seems to be more what you do should not hurt anyone else. So he even makes a point of saying it's not just about your conscience. Because I think when we were witnesses, it was all about, well, this would offend my conscience, even though it was really the Watchtower's conscience.
Yeah.
We would say that it was because we couldn't do this in good conscience. If that's true, then don't do something. Yeah. If it is going to bother your conscience. But he's more concerned that you don't stumble somebody else's conscience.
So, if he's invited to an unbeliever's home, he's actually talking about the Corinthians here when he says if one of the unbelievers invites you to dinner, supposing the unbeliever is a Jew and he has a conscience that's different than yours, and he still thinks in terms of he will eating, if he's an unbelieving Jew, and not a Christian, that is. He's going to think kosher, and therefore you're to
respect his conscience.
But if he's a Gentile and goes to a meat market and gets meat, you don't start asking him what the source of the meat is.
That's right.
Whether it's
Make
kosher
no
meat.
inquiry. Well, we made a point of making inquiry. I remember as a kid, you had to find out if they were serving hot dogs at the school party. You had to go and ask, what kind of hot dogs are these?
Yeah, and there were two kosher, that is Jewish, sources for hot dogs, for instance, and those were safe, and the others were not.
Yeah, although I only remember it being, the concern only seemed to be with hot dogs. Like, I don't know, I don't remember anybody ever saying that about sausages or.
Well, they did say it about. They did say it about cured meats, etc. Like if you get it from a Jewish deli, you're okay, but if you don't, watch it. Be careful.
Yeah.
So
but
then,
here he's saying, don't even inquire.
So obviously Paul feels free because he says at the end, "Be imitators of me." So these are things he does, and he says, "Well, watch what I do. I'm not a Jew anymore. When I'm sitting with Jews, I'm observing their conscience. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But when I'm sitting with Gentiles, I don't make a big fuss."
Yeah. So the time when he said it does make a difference is if the person is, it makes a point of telling you. And so you this could be because he's testing you, like so you always have to think about what is this going to do to this person?
Yeah.
Is it going to stumble them? Is it going to hurt their possibilities of coming to faith? Or losing faith in some respects. So I think in our life in the church, we found that in Christian communities, there are communities that are okay with drinking wine, and there are other Christian circles where nobody drinks wine, and it would bother them if you were drinking wine. So if you're having someone over for dinner and you don't know what their position is, I think you should be, from his policy here, you should be thinking of their conscience, and so you would not serve wine. Maybe you would make a point of being sensitive, especially if you knew they didn't.
That's right.
Then you wouldn't bother their conscience. You wouldn't hurt them, even if you feel perfectly at ease with it.
Well, this is obviously of great moment or importance if you are a witness, because it does bring in the two big principles. One is the separation that you artificially make, and this wasn't even Rutherford, this is in the Nathan Noor and Fred Franz era, this idea that the blood thing is so important we have to shun people who don't agree with it, which came in with the disfellowshipping or shunning policy in the 1940s and 50s. So the other thing is the bad association one. So if you realize that you wouldn't get that from here, because he's saying you can go to dinner with an unbeliever.
Yeah.
But But you get that thought, you get that verse from 1 Corinthians 15, where he's talking about something completely different than who you mix with. He's talking about teachers who teach a false doctrine of the resurrection.
Brothers who are
promoting a false idea
Yeah.
about the gospel,
Yeah.
namely the resurrection. So that distortion is only possible if you don't read the context. That is, the immediate context in Corinthians 15 is people who teach a false idea about something as important as the resurrection. Those are definitely bad associations that you should
Yeah.
avoid. But
Yeah.
on the other hand, here, where it's not an issue of gospel, but it's an issue of mixing with people who are not believers, it obviously doesn't think that way. So this passage essentially explodes two things that distinguish you from almost everybody else. That you avoid everybody who's not Jehovah's Witnesses,
Yeah.
and that you want to set yourself apart and even enforce a thing that sets you apart by shunning people who dare to disagree.
Yeah. And you're more worried about your own conscience than you are other people's.
Being contaminated, yes.
Yeah. You were going to read a quote from...
This is F.F. Bruce, a brief quote on this very passage about foods and freedom. That Paul should give Christians carte blanche, that is, complete freedom, to eat whatever is sold in a pagan market shows how completely emancipated he was from Jewish obligations in the matter of food, and how loosely he sat to the food restrictions of the Jerusalem decree. He's talking about the very place we get the blood restrictions at, Acts 15.
Yeah.
That Paul wasn't applying this in Corinth, although the letter from Jerusalem seems to say that those congregations where it was an issue, where conscience was an issue, should apply this
Yeah.
in terms of the conscience of the Jewish element within those congregations.
So when he's in Jewish circles, he does what Jewish people do. Yeah.
Yeah. What's our link?
We're linking to a video from our Ray France series. This one is on Romans 14. It's J.W. Org Bogus Unity Rejects Apostolic Counsel on Conscience.
This is about Romans 14, isn't it?
Yeah.
Good. See you next time.